This
us.
conference will
But
now be recorded.
I'm barely getting time to, like whatever you're teaching to practice. But I'm sure that your recording is going to, help us in future for sure.
Sure,
So
sure.
once I get some time, I'm going to try everything following your recording.
That shouldn't be a problem. So my only concern is if you guys are really keeping quiet. So I am just skeptical. Like, are you really understanding it or you're not understanding? That's what I thought. So I thought I'll check with you guys first. So I
Yeah, that's good. It's a what I will say that initially it was a bit like smooth going, but later on it was a bit like difficult for me. But I
uh,
think again and again, if I follow your recording, then
mhm.
probably it would be more easier for me. It's what I feel.
Understood, understood. That shouldn't be a problem. So my only concern is until unless you are, you are able to understand it, I am good. I'm good with it. But if in case you don't feel comfortable and you're not able to understand it, any point of time you can raise a question. Not even now, but even after the session when you try to practice and look at the, you can write down your questions and then you can send the questions in case you think you will forget it. You can send it across to the team, Satish or Naresh, so they can also coordinate with me. I can take up those queries because I
Okay,
think
that would be
we
really
are,
helpful. Yeah, thank you so much.
yeah, yeah, sure. So because we are almost like nearby to the ending of session, so what will happen is later point of time when you guys start practicing it, then you might feel that this was something which we missed out. So you will have to come back again. So that I don't want that situation to come in. So that's the only thing.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, surely. So, are you going to end tomorrow or day after tomorrow? Or
Day
same?
after tomorrow, I think today most of the concepts will be completed. So I was thinking to give a basic overview of an clock in clock out because let's say if you it's a new feature altogether. It's again a separate feature that needs to be enabled. So I'll give you a basic configuration like what to enable for the clock in and clock out, so that I'll be able to cover it by tomorrow's session. So if you guys have any questions, I'll be able to take it up. It will take another day, but most probably we'll be able to end it by tomorrow.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And also one thing I just wanted to emphasize, Lata, that like while conducting a workshop with client,
Mhm.
how do you really handle it? Because this module is very new to me. So if you could
Correct.
really help us, yeah, something there
So
would be
definitely
really
we will
helpful.
have one session. Yeah. So definitely we'll have a one session. I mean one particular part of the session where I'll show you the time of configuration workbook and the kind. The time tracking configuration workbook. The kind of expectations we can check with client and how are we expecting the data. So definitely it's not like an EC. I would say so. EC is a simple, straightforward. If you want this field, enable it. If you want this field, you enable it. That's what we give as a configuration workbook. Or even if it's a talent module also, it's a process, right? This is also a process. So
Mm-hmm.
just like to understand the process, if you have the policy, we gonna have it in a theoretical way. We will have some questionnaires, like kind of a questions that we need to check with them, so that I will be able to help you out. Depending upon the customers ongoing conversations, you can tweak in all your questions or queries, because you know the system properly. Then you'll be able to question all those whatever you wanted to bring it in the system. So that I will
Mm-hmm.
definitely cover as a part of the configuration workbook. So I don't think we will have a lot of things to cover today. So if time permits, we'll be able to show you that as well. I mean, we'll cover the timesheet configuration workbook as well,
Okay,
which
fine.
will
Yeah.
help us. Yeah. So okay, let me quickly share my screen. Hi Akash, good morning. So yeah, so yesterday we have seen that what kind, let's say if we are recording the hours on non-working day, whether it is a holiday or considered as a non-working day as part of the work schedule, what are the time filters that we're going to use. We have seen that as part of it. The next thing, I'll just quickly show you, just a quick recap. So the input was normally a recorded hours without breaks. That is what we're gonna do. If you have the common attendance type, like if you choose the same recording type for even Saturday and Sunday, then you should be giving an input which is called as a recorded working time. But let's say some customers might have separate attendance types, like for example, non job recording hours. So those kind of things, like if they have a separate attendance altogether to track, and they wanted to track it only on Saturday and Sunday or a public holiday, then you have to have the input for which brings out those kind of attendances. Otherwise they should be fine. And the filter or the threshold that we have set up is the valuation type called as in filter input groups. So when you choose filter input groups, you will have an additional object that you need to configure, whether this configuration should be basically, so you can further define whether it should be a non-working day, or you should be, you will also have an objects to configure various things, like a week based on the weekends, like Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, those can also be configured. If it is specifically some shift classifications you wanted to capture, so that can also be done if the customer is using the shift kind of classifications, and these all are derived from the work schedule. So whatever you define it in the work schedule, that is derived here. This is generally a generic statement or a generic condition where you can select the weekdays, whether it is Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, the complete 7 days. You can filter as per the requirement. And in case if you're using a cross midnight, if your shift is falling between two different dates, which is starting from today midnight and to ending tomorrow morning, in those kind of scenarios, if there is a holiday the preceding day or the previous day or that day, then you wanted to filter out those hours and capture that in the payroll, you can use these filters. So these filters are only applicable if you are using the cross midnight functionality in the work schedule. So we will see what is a kind of a cross midnight work schedule in the later sessions. So this is what we define. And in case if you wanted to have an additional filter, let's say on non-working day at particular timings, then you can have to define here. Otherwise, if you say you don't define any start time and end time, then by default system will pick up all the hours that are being recorded on that particular day, no matter if it is early morning or afternoon or evening or night. It doesn't matter. So that's how you define it. And since I wanted this to be going to the payroll, so and it is falling within the threshold, so I'm choosing time type group below because I wanted to capture the threshold hours. And if you look at the threshold hours, I have set this as yes. And since I wanted to capture this as a payroll, so I'm capturing it at overtime base, because overtime base will redirect to the payroll and I will get it in a monetary terms. So let's say I have worked for 1 hour on let's say this week. So I'm going to get a payment of 1.75 hours. As I said, here we are only replicating the hours. All the payment and everything will be taken care on the payroll side. So that's how you define this, and this is called as a time valuation when you choose the valuation type called as in filter input groups. Now, let's look at another scenario. Like for example, we have seen a particular day, right? Now let's look at the particular time segment. So let's say the time segment filtration. Some employees might have a let's say early login restrictions, right? For example, let's say if my shift is starting at 8 a.m. Okay, So I have a grace period of early start up to 1 hour. Let's say I can start at 7 a.m. in the morning. Normally we call this as a flexi time bandwidth. Like if you guys are working on 8 a.m. to let's say evening 7 5 p.m. shift, right? So it's basically what happens here is basically I'll just define. So this is actually your shift period. Okay. Now you will have a certain grace period which you can define 1 hour before and a few hours later. So let's say even if you are working after 5 o'clock, you can consider it that as an overtime or any of the flexi time in case if your organization policy permits. But let's say for this particular case, the early start case, right? If they only have a grace period of 1 hour, let's say this employee can start working 1 hour before their login hours, which is 7 a.m. But before that, if an employee is trying to log in uh, at the times like for example 6 o'clock in the morning or 5 o'clock in the morning, system should not allow him to work on it. So should system should throw an error. Now in these kind of situations where you wanted to throw an error or define a conditions, we have something called as the non-login hours where I'm just using this one. So this is a time valuation which we create. Okay. So what is the time valuation here is? So basically, um, I cannot use the existing one. Let me create another one. So time valuation here is non-working day, non non-login hours. Okay. So non-login hours, we wanted to raise an error. So with the help of evaluations also we can raise an error. And since I was saying about a time filter segment, I could have used filter input groups. But in the input groups, I will have to define the days also. I don't want that to be done, that to be taken care. So I'll go with the another valuation type called as the filter segment groups from the input groups. That means system will automatically pick the time segments from whatever we are recording. So you don't need to define any extra object here. You just have to define your timings. So now what is the time is? If anybody is trying to log in from let's say midnight 12 o'clock till morning 7 o'clock, that's what the scenario is. So this employee is starting to work at 8 o'clock. So in my case, if is trying to log in before 7 a.m., let's take from the complete day. So I'll take this as 12 from midnight and 7 in the morning. Just see this. So now this is a simple thing. And now since I wanted to capture the data that is falling into this section. So this section, so this is actually always configure it in the time type group below because it's falling within the threshold. So let's say non-login hours. Valuation factor, I'll keep it 0 because we wanted to capture as the data. Now, should be a calculated time. I don't want to show it on the system because we just wanted to raise an error message. Just keep this as 1. Okay. And sorry, this is external code, right? 1 second. Non hours L2. And here you go. Now if you see we haven't used this kind of situations, right? Or basically message flag or something. So normally we have always set this as do not raise message, but here you have an option where you can raise a message. So raise a message on time type group above raise a message on time type group below. Since we are capturing the data on the time type group below, that means any data which is falling into this sector and the data is coming and storing here, that is when you have to raise a message. Now, when you click at that, you can also have whether you wanted to have an error or whether you wanted to have alert and warning. So these are the only things, the two things which is basically needed. And one quick thing, if you guys are trying to attempt time certification, definitely the I'm trying to I am trying to give you most of the kind of an examination questions they will ask us, so make sure that you are actually looking at whatever the drop down values are, kind of a data. If you set up the filter and segments, what is the time type group below which it will capture? They will give some certain scenarios because I have attempted a certification, so I know kind of a questions they will gonna ask in this exam. So please make sure that you are paying attention to these kind of little minute details. So error, I wanted to raise this as an error, and let's say I wanted to show an error message. This is just simply and exactly like what we see in the EC alerts. So we define the alert message, we define a message definition, and then we raise a message, right? So we use that with the help of a business rule, but here we're making use of time valuation. So it's a kind of a business rule altogether in timesheet. So I wanted to raise this as you are not allowed to record hours before 7 a.m. Now I'll just give an input here, which is recorded hours, yeah, without breaks, and then just say yes. Now this is one kind of evaluation, and the evaluation type that we have chosen is, so now let's look in the system. Okay, now let's think that we are recording the hours before 7 a.m. Let's say 6 a.m. See this? That's how you can raise a error message depending upon the kind of conditions that you want to set in. If somebody is not, let's say somebody's exceeded some hours or making some changes to some kind of things, so you can define it using the time valuation. Right? This is one kind of an observation or one kind of an activity that we perform. And we'll see another scenario which is specifically called as common scenario, which we have seen across the globe. Like they are allowed to record overtime only up to certain hours in a month. Now, since it's a weekly timesheet, we do not have that provision to check monthly wise, but there's something called as a time collector. So time collector is basically will allow you to collect the time, and it's a kind of a virtual bucket. It's a fake bucket which will store that data up to 1 month, and then it will run the validations against it. So for example, if you have a requirement where let's say after 20 hours of your overtime, system should not allow you to record extra overtime hours in a month. Now that can be achieved using, but depending upon the organization policy, whether they wanted to raise it as an error message completely restricted, or if you wanted to raise it but give a warning to the employee, that's what you can achieve using the time collectors. Now, how do we normally raise an error messages? First, we need to create two types of valuation. First valuation is where you're collecting the hours monthly. Now, what the system will do is whether it is, uh, it will check for your, and here in this case, we only wanted the total overtime. So let me duplicate this. Yeah, we'll start with the overtime. Okay. So in the first evaluation, now what we will do is collect overtime in monthly bucket. Okay. The valuation type will remain zero because here we are just collecting the data. So valuation type, we wanted to keep it as simple, and since I'm using the aggregate input and split because I wanted a fixed value. So because any data that is falling or coming into the validation should be passed and given only a zero value. Since it's a mandatory type, we have to select one of the valuation type. Since this is no harm to select, so that's why I've selected this. Okay. Now here we wanted total overtime as an input. So this is the total input, which is nothing but the third evaluation output. Right now we are getting that overtime completely in. This is passing on. So anything minus zero is the same number. So, so that we are getting, and we are capturing it at the so since the threshold is zero, we don't need to define the below, because here if you define something it will capture zero here, but above zero I wanted to capture, so we are defining the time type group above. So let's say overtime collected, the valuation result will remain zero. And since it's a calculated time, I wanted to keep it as calculated time. I don't want to raise this as an time type or a payroll. This is simply just for a calculation and validation purpose. So I'm keeping these both as zero. Now you have an option where, let's say, give me OT. So we have an option where you wanted to collect the data. So for all the cases, we have set it as no, but here we can keep this as yes. And if you look at the moment you say this yes, it will ask you whether what is the periodicity. So if it is daily, weekly, monthly, so you can raise an error message. If you wanted to do it monthly, you can select monthly. You can, if you wanted to do it weekly. If an organization has a requirement whether they wanted to restrict the daily working overtime hours, then you can choose daily hours, or if it is weekly you can choose weekly, or if it is monthly, I'll choose monthly for now. So when you're done, just add this valuation. We are not yet completed, guys. So once you're done with this, just leave this. So now you have, here you don't define any error message because we just collected the valuation at this point of time. Now we need to create another valuation. Sorry, valuation, valuate whole sheet. Okay, so it's has per day. Now we have collected monthly now. Now we have to raise an error message. So error message, definitely the output, the input would be the output of the previous one, which is monthly. And then here we wanted to raise an error message, right? So raise error message on OT collected monthly. So valuation type again, aggregate input split groups, because this is the only option where I can select the fixed value. Let's say I'm giving 20 hours. Okay, so I'm saying any monthly overtime which is falling above 20 hours, it should give me an error message. And the valuation type is basically valuate per day. And then since it is falling above, below, it shouldn't raise an error message. Above, it should raise an error message. So I'm collecting the time type group above value. Valuation type will be remaining 0 here. Calculated time also 0. Since we are raising an error message, we don't want the options to be here. So let's say OT above 20. So here we have collected the data that is falling above 20. So any hours that are falling above 20, we should be raising an error message. So previous one we have seen below, right? Now since we are collecting the data on the above, so we will raise a message here. I wanted to keep this as an alert and warning. So alert and warning is nothing but when you set this as this, it will give a warning to the end user, which is for an employee. For Gordon Ramsay, he will receive a warning message. But the employee's workflow, we have an manager as an approver, right? He will get an alert saying that this particular employee has recorded hours more than that, and what. So let me permitted OT value per month is only 20 hours. You have exceeded the limit. This will send an alert to your manager. So just an error message. Save it here and then you assign it here. Okay, now let's try doing it. So it's a monthly one. And what is the total overtime? We have 19 hours. Let's say I'll capture additional. So if you see this means employee will receive an alert, just an alert, because it's not an hard stop error, it's a soft error. It will the permitted OT value per month is only 20 hours. You have exceeded the limit, and this will send an alert to your manager. So since the manager, so he will receive an alert here itself. So I'll just show you that. So this is how we raise a time valuation defects. And then so this way there are various types of valuation types. The only valuation type which we have not used is the filter single records from input. And so this is specifically compare threshold with the input groups and count events. This is specifically used for the cases where, let's say, if an employee has when I click on this, right, if an employee comes into Let me create a new one and see. Yeah, so you have a requirement where an employee comes in late and there's a late error or a let's say you wanted to count it whether it is a first instance, second time late, or third time late. If you wanted to capture those kind of things, then definitely you can use compare the threshold with the input group. So the threshold here is basically a fixed value or a time type group. Now, in this case, we generally go with the scenario like if it is, so you will have to define a time type group here. So time type group is nothing but before doing it, let's say you are encountering a time. Let's say if somebody has crossed 8 a.m. You might have a grace period of late coming hours, right? Let's say if an employee is coming at from 8:05, right? If you look at the time segment, it is 8 o'clock, 5 minutes till let's say 9 o'clock. This is a grace period, right? So this should be count if anybody is falling within this time frame. If somebody is logging at this time frame, it should be considered as an late coming. Now, how do we do this? Is we do with the evaluation, two types of evaluation. So the first evaluation would be like these kind of things. Just as we used a filter time segment, right? Those segment we will need to define in the first evaluation with this filter, and the output of this valuation will serve as an input to this valuation. So whenever you have this evaluation, this will be counted as instances. So if it is first time if it is coming, then it will count as 1, 2, and 3. So similarly, it will count as events. And let's say in a time period in a month, you have came in as five late comings. This will be marked as five, and you can raise a flag to the payroll saying that this has to be considered in the payroll. And in order to show it in the payroll, you just have to do it in the time type group below and overtime base. Overtime base, please keep it as 0 so that the valuation factor is not applied. This will take automatically as 3 or 5 counts. So that's how you define for the threshold value called compare input threshold group and count events. Now this is completely new. I haven't used it in any kind of case, but what I understand is basically you can compare between the groups and then raise a condition to it. I haven't come across any of the requirement, but if in case you guys come across any of the requirement, you can actually compare the group. Since again, comparison group is nothing but you will have to define the time type group again, and then compare in between both, and then carry it forward. Honestly, I haven't come across the scenarios, and this is something newly added to it. So filter single records is kind of this is also something new to new which has come in. I haven't seen anything coming across. So if you guys have anything in your mind whether how to create it or use it, you can actually use and compare it with a single record called as an evaluation type. So so kind of an example here. I don't see an example, but if in case you find anything that is relevant, which in case of your requirement, you can use those kind of requirements. So, so let's come to the next section called as in validation rules. So this is kind of a business rule and a simple validation, I would say. Like for example, this is exactly like how it works for the EC business rules, the take rules of time off. So here, it's the simple valuations, like simple conditions. If somebody is exceeding any hours, um, within a day or within some hours. If you wanted to raise an error message, you can use that. So let me choose a correct one. Yeah. So in order to create a timesheet validation, you will have to select a scenario called as in timesheet validation the moment you start creating the rule. So this will automatically pick up the parameters as expected. So in case if you have anything additional, you can actually add the parameters. However, but so basically the timesheet day and the context is automatically selected by the system. Now here, if you look at the system, this is exactly the EC rules. You can, here in this case, only thing is you can only raise an error message or make some changes. This everything will not work for um, this kind of validation. Since the validation is nothing but you have to raise an error message or a warning message. Those kind of things can only be achieved using the timesheet validation rules. So in this case, it's a simple thing. Let's say if an employee is exceeding hours, so we could have done it using the time valuation, but as you have seen the time valuation, you have to create one or two valuations to properly work on it. So for example, if you look at this scenario, we could have achieved using this kind of monthly collection and then erase an error message. So instead of creating a complicated rule and a complicated valuation, we can create a simple rule and also raise an error message if it is a very short requirement. Like for example, in this scenario where you see, I'm using an existing one, let me add. Okay. So in our case, we also have an on-job training, right? So training hours. So what it means is it is actually comparing it for a daily ones. It's not a monthly one. So in a day, if a quantity in hours is exceeding 2, if your recording type is training hours, the attendance type is training hours, then it should raise an error message. So don't look for the text. It's actually wrong here, but normally it should be 2 for the education hours, right? So basically you can add those kind of conditions and then just add it and save. So only limitation here is you can assign only one rule for time recording profile. Let's say if you have an additional conditions, you will have to add this additional condition using else if. Like let's say this is only one condition which I've added, right? But instead of that, I can add else if, and add as many conditions as I want. But this will follow the sequence like the highest condition should be on the top, the lowest condition should be on the lower side, so that it is passing all the, so if you wanted to execute, it is passing all the scenarios. That's how we need to configure the rules. So once you add it, let's look at the scenario here. Okay, use this. Okay, so I said if my training hours are exceeding 2, just 2.5 hours, see, it will raise an error message. This is a simple validation which you wanted to do on a uh, single day. Like it's a single day validations can be achieved using the validation rules here. So this is how we're gonna work on the time recording profile. So this is it with the, this is the major configuration that we need to do it in the timesheet. The other object that we normally look into is the time recording admissibility. So this is again an element of the job information. What this does is, as I said, you have a provision where you will have to select or restrict the employees to make the changes to the approved timesheets. Like for example, up to certain weeks. Since it's a weekly timesheet, you will have an option only in the weeks. So it will restrict only based upon the hours or weeks, sorry, on the weeks that you define it. So if you look at this one, so it says 4 weeks. The name itself defines as 4 weeks and no amendments allowed. So what does it means is here you will have to define the weeks. If you look at this, specify the number of weeks in the past employees are not allowed to record time or amendments to their timesheets. So if you say 3, that means it will allow you 3 weeks timesheet in the past to make the changes. Now this is where the flag is really important. So if you choose yes, if you wanted to allow to amend the already approved timesheets. So which means, let's say if it is yes, then let's say your week's timesheet is already approved by your manager. And if you wanted to make the changes to the approved timesheet, definitely choose yes here. If you're not allowing the approved timesheets to allow make the changes, then please select this as no. So if you select yes, now depending upon the requirement, if you have a requirement like approved timesheets changes, then you will have to select a flag called yes. Unapproved means you will have to select no. So this is what the difference here it is. And give an external code which is relevant for it, and then just save it and then assign it on the employee's job information. So this is about the time recording admissibility, and depending upon the customer's requirement, whether you wanted to do it 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, or whether you want to make the changes to the approved ones or unapproved ones, you can select based on these conditions. This is one of the important time admissibility rules. The other one which we normally look at is a dynamic break configuration. So the dynamic break configuration is nothing but let's say you have two things for the while defining the work schedule. So if you look at this particular work schedule, you already have a planned breaks, right? So the planned breaks are nothing but it's already defined with the segments. So your start time and end time is fixed here. Similarly, your breaks are also fixed here. That means 10 o'clock to 10:15 is your first break, 12:30 to 1:15 is your second break, which is your 15 minutes first break, 45 minutes later break. So now in this is called as a fixed break, which is defined at the work schedule level. Now, what is the disadvantage for having these kind of breaks is, let's say if an employee is starting to work before 10 o'clock, it won't be a problem. But let's say if an employee is starting after 10 o'clock, since it's a fixed break, system will still consider 10 o'clock as a break. Now, how we see that is, let's say, so the moment you select the recorded working hours, because of the mapping that we see here, right, since this is starting at 8 o'clock, it will start your break at 10 o'clock because you have a fixed break here. Now, let's say on Friday, because of some activities, we are starting at 10 o'clock, okay? And let's say we are ending at 2 o'clock, 2:30. Now just look at this. This doesn't make any sense, right? The moment we start, the breaks get automatically assigned. This is a major disadvantage if you are using the fixed kind of an breaks. Now instead of mitigate these kind of issues, in order to have a dynamic breaks, we do not define the work schedule with the breaks. So we have a plain work schedule where we have only 8 o'clock to 7. So the start time and end time only. We don't define the breaks in the work schedule. We define it using the customized break configuration. So if you look at the customized break configuration, now let's look at it. This is a name we can give as we want it, as per the requirement. You can give an external code. Now if you see this method of generating the breaks, whether you wanted to have a full deduction or a partial deduction, I would always suggest to go with the partial deduction and ignore the gaps in between the working time. So why? Because if you say partial deduction, system will automatically adjust according to the data that you are sending in. Like for example, let's say you have a break. uh, let's say your recorded hours are not falling within the two breaks. Let's say if I am I'm starting at 10 o'clock and ending at 12:40, 12:50. Okay, 12:55. So if you see this, even though I'm ending it at 12:50, even though I'm ending at 12:55, my record is my scheduled record break is automatically ending is picking up again at 12:30. So this is called as a full deduction. If you say full deduction, then it will actually try to incorporate all the breaks into the system, even though it is not falling within my recorded working time. So instead of that, you use partial deduction. So when you use a partial deduction, so if your hours are not falling in between in within those dynamic breaks, system will not input that hours. So partial reduction is always recommended. Gaps in working time is, so if you say ignore, so system will automatically count the breaks or ignore them. So so this is specifically applicable if you're using the clock in and clock out, if you're using the biometric systems. So this you can keep it as an ignore them, or you can also consider the gaps as an breaks also. So, and how we define here is, if you look at this, this is a work time, I mean the working time, and you have to define the breaks in minutes. So if you give 2 hours, if you look at this particular requirement, what it is no matter at what time you start, from starting of your logging time till 2 hours, after 2 hours, you will receive 15 minutes of break, right? So this is what it is. So 15 minutes of break, you will receive it. And then again, after the break hours, it will start your next working time. So after extra 2 hours, like after completing your 2 hours, this is actually in comparison. So after hours, it will give you again 30 minutes of break. So this is actually getting added. So if you look at 15 and 45, the gap is between 30 minutes. So the second break is of 30 minutes. And if you look at this one, again after 2 hours, the gap between these two is again 15 minutes. So there's a 15 minutes break after additional 2 hours of working. So this is how you define a dynamic break configuration and assign it at the employee's job information level. So if you see this, So normally what is the recommendation is if you're using the work schedule with already fixed break, do not make use of break configuration. So this will conflict between both of them. But if you are using the if you wanted to use a dynamic break configuration, definitely make sure your work schedule should be without breaks, without any breaks defined in the work schedule. So that's how it should go hand in hand. So that is what about the dynamic configuration is. This is another important concept if you're going with. So this is applicable for the cases where you have clock time positive recording. Any questions here before moving to the kind of work schedules that we define? I'll just quickly show you. So if you see this, if you wanted to use a hello,
No, Lata, no question.
yeah. So if you wanted to make a use of dynamic break, definitely define the work schedule like what we see here. So it says dynamic. This work schedule is specifically for the dynamic break. So in this, let's look at the. So you define it as a period model, and at the period model, you define the day models again. So what is a day model is again you will have to select only the start time and end time, and there's no breaks defined here. Okay, so if you look at the work schedule for this employee, you will see the breaks also being scheduled here. So this unscheduled break is already defined here with 10 o'clock to 10:15. So that is what we define here. Now, in the work schedule, there are two things which we normally configure it. So, if you remember, we spoke about the flexi time, basically the eligibility for the employees to start the hours at the early and end the hours at the latest possible. Okay, so that is normally called as a flexi time bandwidth. And how you define that is using the category inside the day model of and you can define this only when you're using the period model or a scheduled model of work schedule. So I hope Harsha has already covered it. But what is a simple model, what is a period model, and what is a scheduled model, right? So in those kind of cases where you're using a day model, that is where you will have this option to select the flexi bandwidth. Now in this bandwidth you can define the earliest possible to start, which is like, and then the ending is let's say 11 o'clock in the night. So this means this is falling within the bandwidth of your timings. So this is the earliest possible start time and latest end time. And the employee can start at any time before 8 a.m. like 1 hour. They can start from 7 a.m. and they can end up to 11 o'clock in the evening. So if you have any requirement, such kind of requirements, right? If you remember, there was a long login hours. If somebody is trying to record above 7 o'clock, they are not allowed to. So if you have defined already in the work schedule, we would have been easily filter out the flexi bandwidth. So if somebody is falling outside of this day, they will definitely get an error message. That's what you can define. So that's how you define a flexi bandwidth. And let's say sometimes customers allow or the employers allow also for employees to work outside of their flexi bandwidth. In case you wanted those kind of data to be captured, then you can also create a separate attendance type with a category called as in classification. If you remember, let me quickly show you the classification. So for the recorded working times, we have created this classification as attendance, right? So instead of attendance, you can create extra. So when you choose extra, so this is where system will allow you to record the hours falling outside of your bandwidth, outside of your bandwidth. So this way you create extra time type and then and you can record the hours if somebody is recording before 7 a.m., so that you will have a separate flag against that recorded hours. So that is about the flexi bandwidth. And we have something called as an, let's say if you have a cross midnight shifts, like somebody's working between two different days, and those kind of work schedules, we use a midnight shift, midnight. Let me see if you find something for cross midnight. So this is kind of in times that we, so cross midnight is applicable only for the clock times. And if you see, this is a shift classification. This is basically a late shift for this particular if you're using this work schedule, this is generally classified as a late shift because it's falling between two different days, right? So if we look at the planned hours here, it's starting, so it is starting at 9 o'clock. So I think this is wrong, but normally it's starting at 9 o'clock in the night and ending in the morning at 5 o'clock. And if you wanted to make a use of this, then we specifically assign the cross midnight shift as yes, and you can also define the night shift bandwidth. So night shift bandwidth is nothing but it will allow you to select the hours falling between two different days. Like for example, let's say this is actually your 21, 21, and this is your morning time. Okay, and since it's a morning night starting at 9 o'clock till morning 6 o'clock, so you can define a time bandwidth saying that you can start at 8 o'clock in the morning, like in the night time, and end it by 8 o'clock in the morning. So this is your night shift bandwidth, which will allow between two different days. So when you choose this kind of work schedule, system will automatically raise a flag on the timesheet with +1. Like for example, let me go to, so let's say if you're recording hours, let's say in the night, and that recording hours are falling at 6:30. So if you see this is an indicator which system will show you that it is a +1 day. So work schedule, if you have defined the work schedule which is falling with the cross midnight, this 1 day will be considered into the first day, which is actually on Monday. So the hours that are recorded on Tuesday, technically, if we speak technically, then from 12 o'clock to 6:30 is generally considered as a day for Tuesday. So when we choose a work schedule that is falling in the cross midnight and you're trying to record the hours, system will automatically take this from 12 o'clock to 6:30, whatever the hours, which is 6.5 hours, will automatically redirect and store it in the Monday's bucket. So that's how we are important to define the night shift cross midnight work schedule for any employees who are falling with the late shift. So that is the relevance of the combinations of different objects that we make use of. And you will understand this kind of situations only when we speak to the customer. So we have to take into mind about all these kind of scenarios. And then when we speak to customer, we should be able to imagine in the system like how we can set up in the system. If we know about the system, we will have a lot of questions which we can raise with client. So with that, today I take a pause at this moment. Tomorrow we will have a quick session on timesheet workbook and what are the questionnaires that we need to follow up with the employees. I mean the organization or a customer or a client, and what kind of questions we need to raise with them, and how are the configuration workbooks generally filled for time related processes. That we're going to see it, and also we'll see on the reports, like the standard reports. There's nothing to do with the report configuration. However, how the standard reports are available, you just have to run or import that. I'm going to show it, and we'll see a quick configuration on the clock in and clock out. This is just a basic overview which we're trying to give it in the timesheet, but clock in clock out has a separate configuration altogether, but we'll provide you the basic configuration that's needed for us to enable it in the system. So, so that with that, I'll end the session today, Madhu. Thank you for your time. Please try to configure in the system if it's permitting any time for you, and any questions would be appreciated.
Sure. Thank you, Lata.
Thank you, Madhavita. Yeah.